Now on for another new series. On the Edge presents the first of 4 films about the influence and importance of improvisation in music.
Let's go.
Improvisation, the most widely practiced of all musical activities, is probably the least recognized or understood. Vague descriptions like making it up as you go along or playing off the top of your head give no idea of the pervasiveness and the power of improvisation in music. Perhaps the air of mystery that surrounds it is inevitable. Improvisation is to do with change, adjustment, development, elusive ideas. It isn't any one style of music. It doesn't belong to East or to West. But it is the creative force in these and many other musics. It's present everywhere, in the most complex musical designs and in the earliest attempts at music making. In Chicago's Chinatown, at Haynes School, a class is introduced to music making by Douglas Ewart. He's using methods based entirely on improvisation.
Usually I say nothing to them. I come in and I begin playing and then they begin playing and we experiment from there. Improvisation has several benefits. In most subjects that are taught in school, children individually, they synthesize the lesson. Here, they have to work together. So they're dependent on each other. They're waiting for each other. It doesn't matter whether they're the A student or the D student to me. Those things don't matter. I don't grade them anyway. The only grade that I deal with is participation. Like the exercise where we use the drumsticks. After we get going and we play for a while, the music begins to develop cohesion. And we begin to move together on a much higher intuitive level than they probably ever have an opportunity in most classes to do. I think they get enormous benefit from improvising. Is freedom to interject their own ideas into something. And no one is going to scrutinize it and say, oh, that wasn't good, or oh, you weren't thinking, or none of those. The idea is never rejected. It's an idea that we can immediately embrace. Beautiful. Okay.
Music making is not usually available to these children as part of their daily lives. Mostly, music comes ready-made and is offered, like popcorn, as something to buy and consume. Live music making has all but vanished from the streets and from their homes. It's become a rarity, and it's often out of reach. Within reach is music on record. So, in the absence of indigenous music, this is where they're likely to find their roots. And in music, whatever you're looking for, if it's authenticity or originality or transcendentalism or traditionalism, the best place to look is in a record store. But you won't find, or you find very rarely, any mention of improvisation. It's not a term which has become part of the record industry's promotional vocabulary. In most musics, it's unrecognized and it's unacknowledged. When it appears, nobody knows anything about it. If they do, there's very little comment about it, except in European classical music, where improvisation is extinct. To invent something is totally beyond the scope of the modern orchestra. Its function seems to be more technological or, at best, Pavlovian. And perhaps they get nearest to improvisation when they're tuning up. European concert music, so-called classical music, provides an unlikely setting for improvisation. Formal, precious, enthralled to its historical geniuses and their timeless masterpieces, this music usually shuns the accidental and the unexpected. And yet, improvisation played a vital part in the genesis of this music, as in virtually all music. Mozart himself was more valued by his contemporaries as an improviser than as a great composer.
Industry wants, of course, to make recordings as efficiently as possible. And if you are constantly improvising, it makes it, for instance, rather difficult to splice. Because the second time around, you might be in the upper octave instead of the lower octave of the keyboard, and they put those things together, and the music jumps an octave. And they need something which is relatively straightforward in order for it all to work. And it seems to me that this standardization has produced not just a lack of improvisation, but I think one has to say that apart from a few extraordinary practitioners, a basic level of music making which isn't terribly interesting anymore. That many of the performances are interchangeable, they're middle of the road, they are not challenging, they are above all concerned with the outlines of compositions, but not with their inner content. Neither the emotional nor the intellectual fundaments that create all of the inequalities, the dissonances, the stresses, and the strains in this music, from which, by the way, improvisation also originates. Those things are generally not found because it's risky in every possible way. First of all, it's risky for you because you might get so carried away by what you're doing that you might play a few wrong notes. But our society has lionized this kind of predictable performance, just the way it has lionized a certain standard in shoe polish and toothpaste and laundry detergent. We want certain things that are reliable. You go out and buy a record, and the record's got to have all of the right notes on it, because people go into a concert, they say, oh, the record at home sounds really much better. I mean, I don't know why I paid my £15 to go to a concert, when in fact I would have been better off just listening to that CD I have. And of course, if more people were playing in this creative way in the music which requires it, then that issue would never come up. People would say, oh, it's really a pity that I have this CD at home because I just have to hear the same silly thing all of the time and not really have a sense that I experience the performance that belongs only to me and only to those who heard it, to be treasured forever or to be exchanged with another which I treasure even more, but which is fragile, which is as fragile as this music really ought to be and not capable of replication.
Levin's improvising here consists of decorations to the piano part. Later, in the cadenza, the section left open by Mozart for the performer to improvise, Levin is one of the very few concert pianists prepared to accept Mozart's invitation.
We have a terrible problem now in the 20th century, which is that these pieces have become museum pieces. They have become, through almost limitless repetition, so thoroughly known to everybody that as soon as you add even the most tasteful of embellishments, people are aware of the fact that what they're hearing is something else. This was certainly not true in Mozart's time. I think if the average concert goer just pauses for a moment and contemplates the fact that he or she has undoubtedly heard every work of Mozart, not only twice as many times, but arguably hundreds of times more than the composer himself, shows something about our attitudes to be moved and our attitudes to be flexible about these things. I think, frankly, that the risk of appalling a few people who hear a couple of extra notes is more than balanced by the rewards of assimilating a language and bringing it alive. And we are very, very fortunate in that, in the piano variations, in the solo sonatas, we have many, many examples of precisely the kinds of vocabulary Mozart uses when he desires florid embellishment. You see the autograph version, for instance, of the F major sonata, whose slow movement has a passage that goes... which turns out in the first edition, published as is commonly acknowledged under his supervision, Now, I think it's probably a good guess that if that text, the second one, had not survived and someone were to have done something as flamboyant as that big scale today in a performance, that they would be attacked for having unforgivably gross taste. But
it is a very peculiar thing we're asking, though, because everybody else who improvises nowadays, the folk musician, the jazz musician, is doing it freely. They're just jumping and flying by all of
They don't have a text like this.
They don't have a text like this. What we're asking is that we put ourselves within a cage and then ask for free flight. And I think it's this contradiction that upsets the teachers who would like to see either the all airspace available, or else an airspace closely defined by the written text, and to have this contradiction of a caged area within the bounds of which you are to exercise your free taste. That's the extraordinary thing about the historically authentic movement.
It seems to me, for instance, that sometimes you can sit in your own studio and try embellishments for 3/4 of an hour, and you find one you think that's really pretty good if you like to prepare things. And you go out on stage and you play that same embellishment, and the moment it's played in front of an audience, you know that it's no good. You just know it. There's a truth about a performance, about playing in front of people, that transforms even the absolute identity of notes and tells you that they're right or that they're wrong. But the most important thing is the willingness to take risks and the acknowledgement that doing so invests the artistic statement with a level of integrity, with a level of personality, with a level of uniqueness that nothing else can do. Classic music has a texture which is peculiarly ideal in terms of an improvisatory discourse. That this music, despite its occasional elaborateness on the page, has a translucency, for instance, which is very, very much designed to allow this practice that was so integral to the period to be successfully put across. And I think one of the issues that addresses is the gap between popular and serious culture that exists in our society now, which certainly was not nearly so far during Mozart's time, when folk music was constantly being borrowed and used, and also, indeed, when the performer was much closer to the audience and catered more to the audience and calculated his music to impact upon the audience in a way that these days does not take place. Mozart's letters talk about how he wrote a passage that he knew that the audience would like, and sure enough, they burst into applause in the middle of the movement. Now, who would dream of applauding in the middle of a movement in today's performances? However, if you go to a jazz club and you hear a jazz player, and the jazz player plays a great lick, then everybody applauds immediately. And it's extraordinary to think that as you read these letters, that the ethos in Mozart's concert life was exactly that one finds in a jazz club today. Now, if we're incapable of seeing that, then it shows something about the rigidity that has grown into the performance of this kind of music, which is most unfortunate.
In contrast to such distinctions between high and low culture, the composer-improviser John Zorn, a native of New York's Lower East Side, covers all musical bases. Thought by some to be a Mozartian figure, his music reflects the polyglot nature of his surroundings.
I think in blocks, in changing blocks of sound. And in that sense, one possible block is a genre of music. Pop music, jazz music, classical music, blues music, hardcore music. They're all blocks that can be ordered and reordered the way the 12 pitches in the chromatic scale can be ordered and reordered. And Cobra is a really great example because most of the changes happen with downbeats, and it's very clear when you hear the blocks moving. Well, Cobra itself the title comes from a war game. My early game pieces were just sports, like lacrosse, hockey, pool, fencing. And I got bored with those names, and I started using war games, like these kind of bookshelf games that a company like Avalon Hill made.
At a recording session, an ensemble of improvisers brought together by Zorn prepares to perform his music. It's more training than rehearsal. What they play, the actual sounds they make, will hardly be mentioned. Zorn directs them in how he wants them to communicate with him and with each other.
The scene that I basically grew up in was a scene of improvisers who improvised in different degrees and with their own different talents. Everybody kind of grew through playing with each other and through listening to different things and created a very particular way of approaching their instrument. What I was really fascinated with was finding a way to harness these people's talents in a compositional framework without actually hindering what they did best, which is improvising. Finding a way to have them work in a group that created a kind of a shape or a kind of a sound that could be identified with what I was interested in, which is changing blocks of sound, but at the same time which didn't limit their imagination, which never told them what to do.
The cards are Zorn's way of signaling a variety of options available to the players, choices affecting the different ways in which the musicians relate to each other.
It means that as it goes around, let's say it's here, Spelios, you have this amount of time before it comes to you again. You can make eye contact with anybody else in the band as it comes around and say, when it's my turn to play, you play with me. And it's when your turn, whoever you cued will come in with you. Then it will continue to go around again.
The person who makes that call, but anybody
in the band. I think like the comparison between, say, what Stockhausen was doing in the mid-60s and myself is very valid. Something like Plus Minus, which was, I think, an important composition for me, is something where on the score he has lists of play louder than the last sound you heard, play lower than the last sound you heard, play the same volume as the last, things like that, where he's relating to the sounds that the improvisers make. I took that basically one step further. I don't talk about any sounds that anybody's making. I talk about the improvisers themselves. You can play with this person at this time if you want, or with this person, or in alternation with that person. But what you play is totally up to you. And who you decide to play with is totally up to you. Okay, ready?
And the press catch,
For me, it's more about the live situation, because you actually see the physicality of the people going through the process of dealing with these set rules. Every society has rules that people deal with in different ways. What I basically created is a small society, and everybody kind of finds their own position in that society. It really becomes like a psychodrama. It's like scream therapy or primal therapy. People are given power, and it's very interesting to see which people like to run with that power, which people like to run away from it, who are very docile and just do what they're told, and who try very hard to get more control and more power. So like we were saying before, it's very much like the political arena in a certain kind of a sense too. But ultimately, if you're in the audience and you're looking at this, the people on the stage are exposing themselves more nakedly than they ever have before, more nakedly than they are when they're just playing music, because they're having a little carrot dangled in front of them. And it's interesting to see who tries to grab the carrot and who doesn't. And a lot of times the people who try to grab the carrot, it's pulled out of their hands by someone else in the band. So it becomes kind of a scary, frightening thing to be in front of that band, to see these people kind of blossom and become the assholes that they really are.
Hey, Burkett.
Zorn's group relationships are just one of many kinds of improvisation that use the city of New York as a base and as a stimulus. The centre for a type of solo improvisation which dates back to the beginnings of Western music is Paris. Some of the earliest accounts of Christian church services include references to organ improvisation. Since the mid-19th century, a school of organists has specialised in the art of solo improvisation. They have used it in churches and basilicas, where at each service many of the interludes are improvised. Every Saturday evening, during the sortie, an improvisation is played by Naji Hakim, organist at Le Sacré-Cœur.
La tradition de l'improvisation a survécu dans la liturgie, à la différence du monde instrumental en général, parce que, alors que dans la musique instrumentale, tout petit à petit a été noté, les cadences des concertos étaient fixées par les compositeurs, dans le monde de l'orgue, dans le monde de la musique liturgique, en raison de la fonction de l'orgue dans la liturgie, l'organiste continue à improviser. Dans l'Église catholique, différents moments de la messe sont ponctués par l'intervention de l'orgue qui doit tenir compte des contraintes de temps qui sont prévues pour son intervention. Certainement, mon improvisation est une offrande. C'est une offrande que je fais au Seigneur. Et bien entendu, il faut qu'elle soit la plus belle possible. Je fais de mon mieux. Je ne dis pas que chaque fois c'est des merveilles, mais c'est mon offrande. Et c'est pour moi un moment très important de la semaine et de mon existence.
The expressive power of improvisation, its ability to evoke, to communicate, serves many faiths. Gaelic psalm singing has survived in the Isles of Harris and Lewis in the Scottish Hebrides since at least the 17th century. For the islanders, it is more than singing. The personal expression, decoration and individual phrasing takes them beyond the usual rituals and rigidities of religious worship.
Although this singing is now peculiar to the Highlands and Islands more so of Scotland, I don't think it originated with us. I think that at one time say 200 years ago. Throughout most of Scotland, this same pattern would be followed. It was because in those days, few people had access to a Bible, and even if they had access to it, they couldn't read it. All knowledge was transmitted orally, whether it were secular, sacred, topical, traditional, what have you. So I think it was natural that church singing would be in the same way.
The isolation and severity of the surroundings and the harshness of their working lives has led many younger members of this community to leave the islands. But amongst those who stay, there is a strong commitment to their past. Gaelic psalm singing is a survival from another time, but is still a perfect musical reflection of the beauty and bleakness of the landscape. In Scalpe, off the Isle of Harris, the Church of Reverend Smith has its own style of psalm singing. Each community improvises in its individual way. The size and character of the congregation tells its own story of emigration.
I think with Gaelic psalm singing, the actual singing or the notes isn't as important as singing from the heart, and the sincerity of the music is what counts, of not so much the music really, but of the words. And when one sings from the heart, you might just draw a note out that little bit longer. Someone might add just a little twiddly note to it, just because maybe carried away with the feeling of it. We do slide from note to note. You don't just hit a note and move straight from it to another note. You sort of slide from it, and I think that's what gives it the sweeping sort of sound. I've heard it once resembled to the surge of the Atlantic Ocean coming in to shore and ebbing out again. The sweeping sound of it. When we sing in church, it's not that it might be beautiful to the ear. That's not the important thing, but that it would be pleasing to God, and that we sing from the heart rather than to please man.
Because of its power spontaneously to evoke and express emotion, improvisation is, and always has been, a part of religious worship in almost every corner of the world. Outside Western culture, it is easier to find music still embedded in the spiritual life of a society. In India, the human voice is thought to possess spiritual qualities, a God-given instrument. And in Indian music, performance is a search in which the musical and the spiritual are inseparable. One goal pursued through improvisation. Perhaps the devotional nature of the music, the need for direct expression, is the reason why every part of their musical language has, over the centuries, remained unfixed and malleable. The brothers Rajan and Sajan Misra often visit their father's house. Theirs is a family which, with its many branches, has come to represent the musical tradition of Varanasi. The teaching, father to sons, is oral. It's a process which includes the possibility of change and imparts a feeling for what can be done with a rag. A language of precise variations is handed down, but also an encouragement to carry out variations of one's own. Each generation assimilates the music and guarantees its renewal through improvisation. Indian musicians emphasize that a rag is more than its music. It has an essence, found in the mood it evokes, and the pursuit of that mood is again through improvisation.
हम लोग जैसे अब दरबारी गाना हुआ तो दरबारी का एक स्वरूप दिमाग में बैठाया हुआ है, एक पिताजी ने हमारे गुरु ने बताया है और जो हमने सुना है बड़े अच्छे कलाकारों को, तो उसका एक सर्टेन तस्वीर हमारे दिमाग में है। तो दरबारी गाने के लिए हमें उसी लाइन पे और अपना मूड उस तरफ ले जाना पड़ता है। तो उस तरह से दरबारी का हम जैसे विस्तार कर सकते हैं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ, दरबारी के जो स्वरों के विस्तार होंगे वो बहुत आहिस्ता आहिस्ता होंगे और गमक स्वरूप होंगे और उसका जो स्वरूप होगा बहुत डेप्थ लिए हुए होगा, जबकि मारवा का विस्तार दूसरे ढंग से हो सकता है। वहाँ गमक की जरूरत नहीं है, मारवा चंचल प्रकृति का है। रे नि रे ध रे नि ध नि रे ग रे म ध नि रे म रे नि रे नि ध ध नि रे ग म ध नि रे ग म ग रे नि ध सा।
だねれがまだねれがまがれまだねれまれにれにれにれにれがまだねれがまがれにれにれにれにれがまだねれがまがれにれにれがまだねれがまがれにれにれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがまだねれがま
ड्यूरेशन होता है ऑडियंस के हिसाब से, कहीं हमें आधा घंटा मिलता है, कहीं हमें 4 घंटा मिलता है, कहीं हमें 5 घंटा मिलता है गाने को, तो उस हिसाब से हम लोग अपने ये सारे चीज़ों को कंबाइन करके ऑडियंस के सामने पेश करते हैं.
Performances in private houses are a regular part of Varanasi musical life. A form of patronage common in Europe in earlier times, it brings intimacy to the performance, a more natural setting for spontaneity. Indian music has continued in unbroken evolution for 30 centuries or more. Not preserved in the cultural bunkers of academy and museum, but in the hands of improvising performers.
In the second programme of the series, On the Edge traces the influence of music from the fairs of India to the medieval music of Spain. That's Improvisation in Music, next Sunday at 8:30.